100 sleepy facts about the samurai era. Hello there, and welcome to History to Fall Asleep. Tonight, we are walking closely into the long and changing world of the samurai. It is tempting to picture this history through one clear image: a warrior in armor, a curved sword at the hip, cherry blossoms moving in the wind. But the real story is quieter, wider, and more human than a single image can hold. It stretches across nearly 1,000 years of Japanese history. It includes battlefields and castles, certainly, but also ledgers, classrooms, gardens, poems, tea bowls, family duties, village roads, and evenings spent reading by a lamp. The samurai were never one unchanging kind of person. In some centuries they were mounted fighters on provincial roads. In others, they were lords, officials, teachers, artists, guards, debtors, poets, or careful administrators whose working day took place behind a desk. Their world changed with every new government, every harvest, every peace treaty, and every generation. So, as you settle in, there is no need to remember every name or date. Let the details arrive gently, then drift away again. Imagine rain on tiled roofs, the steady sound of sandals on a wooden corridor, and a distant bell beyond the walls of an old castle town. If these quiet journeys through the past help you rest, you're welcome to like, subscribe, or leave a gentle thought below. It helps other tired listeners find their way here too. But for now, let your shoulders become a little heavier. Let the day loosen its grip. And let us begin our slow journey through 100 sleepy facts about the samurai era. Fact 1. The word samurai originally meant someone who served. The English word samurai is familiar around the world, but in Japanese history, it did not begin as a title for every sword-bearing hero. It grew from a verb meaning to serve or attend. Another important word is bushi, meaning warrior. Over time, the two words became closely connected, especially for the military and administrative elite who served powerful households. This small detail is useful because it reminds us that service, loyalty, rank, and obligation mattered as much as personal skill in combat. A samurai was usually part of a relationship serving a lord, a family, a government, or a household. The image of the lone warrior is powerful in later stories, but most real samurai lived within networks of duty. Let that detail rest for a moment. The samurai world was built not only from dramatic events, but from slow adjustments, ordinary work, and people trying to understand their place in a changing order. Fact 2. Samurai first appear in written records around the 10th century. The earliest people we would recognize as samurai emerged during the later Heian period, when the imperial court in Kyoto had difficulty controlling distant provinces. Wealthy landholders and local officials needed protection for estates, storehouses, roads, and rice fields. They hired or raised armed followers. These mounted fighters became increasingly important because the court had no modern police force that could quickly reach every valley and coastline. In the beginning, they were not rulers of the whole country. They were local specialists in security, force, and protection. Yet the skills that made them useful also gave them influence. When government power weakened far from the capital, men with horses, weapons, relatives, and followers could shape local life in lasting ways. Fact 3. The imperial court remained important even after warriors rose to power. A common shortcut says that samurai replaced the emperor. The real picture is more layered. The imperial court remained in Kyoto, and emperors continued to hold deep religious, ceremonial, and cultural importance. What changed was where practical political and military power gathered. Warrior leaders created governments called bakufu, often translated as tent governments or shogunates. These governments operated beside the court rather than simply erasing it. For centuries, Japan had more than one center of authority. The emperor and court in Kyoto, military rulers elsewhere, provincial lords in their domains, temples, shrines, village leaders, and merchants with money and connections. This overlapping structure can feel complicated, but it explains why the samurai era was never a straight line. In the stillness of night, history can feel less like a list of dates and more like a landscape. Roofs, rivers, paper screens, fields of rice, and footsteps fading along a corridor. Fact 4. Early samurai were closely associated with horses and bows. The sword later became the most famous symbol of the samurai, but early warrior culture placed huge value on mounted archery. A warrior on horseback needed balance, stamina, timing, and calm concentration. He had to guide an animal over uneven ground while drawing, aiming, and releasing an arrow. Bows could decide a battle before enemies came close enough for swords. Horses also carried status. Maintaining one required land, fodder, servants, tack, and experience. For this reason, the early warrior elite was tied to rural wealth and estates. In old painted scrolls, mounted archers race across open land with sleeves and banners moving in the wind. The image feels dramatic, but it also shows a practical truth. Military power depended on training, animals, supplies, and organization. Fact 5. Warrior families built strength through bonds of kinship and service. Early samurai did not usually fight as isolated individuals. They belonged to family lines, local alliances, and bands of retainers. A powerful household might gather cousins, servants, farmers, and armed followers. Promises of protection, land, reward, marriage, and future opportunity held such groups together. Loyalty was real, but it was not always simple or permanent. Families could change sides when a stronger neighbor appeared, when survival demanded a new arrangement, a newer mileage. This is one reason samurai history has so many shifting alliances. The language of loyalty mattered deeply, yet political life was also practical. Land had to be defended. Rice had to be collected. Children had to inherit. In that patient and sometimes uneasy work, warrior households became political institutions. You can picture the quiet spaces around this fact, the document on a desk, the sound of wind around a gate, and the patient rhythm of a life that does not appear in heroic paintings. Fact 6. The Genpei War helped bring warrior rule to the center of Japan. Between 1180 and 1185, rival warrior families associated with the Taira and Minamoto clans fought a conflict remembered as the Genpei War. Later tales made its battles famous, especially the final defeat of the Taira at Dan Noura. The war was not only a contest of swords, it grew from disputes over court politics, family influence, appointments, land, and the right to command. When Minamoto no Yoritomo emerged victorious, he established a new military government based in Kamakura, far east of Kyoto. This did not make every corner of Japan suddenly obedient, but it marked a major shift. Warriors were no longer simply hired protectors at the edge of court society. They had become central to national government. The road from provincial service to political rule had opened. Fact 7. The tale of the hike turned warfare into a meditation on impermanence. One of the best-known works connected to this era is the tale of the Heike. It tells of the rise and fall of the Taira family, mixing historical memory, performance poetry, and Buddhist reflection. Its opening thought is famous because it compares the sound of a bell to the impermanence of all things. The tale does not celebrate victory alone. It notices how swiftly wealth, pride, youth, beauty, and political power can disappear. Samurai stories often contain this quiet sadness. A warrior may be brave, skilled, and admired, yet still lose everything because a tide turns, an alliance fails, or a season changes. For a bedtime history, this is one of the gentlest ideas from the era. Even the strongest households were temporary, and the world moved on after them. Let the image become gentle now. The banners, roads, and rooms are far away. But the human wish for safety, purpose, and belonging remains easy to recognize. Fact 8. Minamoto no Yoritomo became the first shogun of the Kamakura government. After the Genpei War, Minamoto no Yoritomo built his power in Kamakura, a coastal town south of modern Tokyo. In 1192, he received the title shogun, a military title that later became the name for Japan's military rulers. Kamakura was a meaningful choice. It was far from the old court capital, and close to the lands where many warrior families had influence. From there, Yoritomo created offices and relationships that tied provincial warriors to his government. The Kamakura shogunate did not look like a modern state with one uniform bureaucracy. It was a web of personal obligations, land rights, military service, and appointments. Still, it gave warrior rule a durable shape. The old capital remained important, but political gravity had shifted eastward. Fact 9. The Kamakura shogunate relied on vassals known as gokunin. A gokunin was a vassal connected directly to the shogun. In exchange for service, a gokunin could receive protection, recognition of land rights, offices, or rewards. The relationship worked because each side needed the other. The shogun needed reliable warriors across the country. The vassal needed a powerful patron who could confirm claims and offer support during disputes. This arrangement tied many to the Kamakura government without requiring the shogun to control every gadadrinvili, candic directly, tardy. It also created tension. If rewards were too small, or if the government failed to defend a family's interests, loyalty could weaken. The system was held together by documents as much as swords. Letters, land records, judgments, and seals. The samurai era was always a world where fighting and paperwork traveled together. Let that detail rest for a moment. The samurai world was built not only from dramatic events, but from slow adjustments, ordinary work, and people trying to understand their place in a changing order. Fact 10. The Hojo family ruled as regents behind the Kamakura shoguns. After Yoritomo's death, real power in Kamakura gradually moved into the hands of the Hojo family, who served as regents for the shoguns. A regent governed on behalf of another ruler, and in practice the Hojo became the leading force in the government. This is another reminder that titles alone do not always explain who had power. A shogun might be respected, but a regent could control appointments, land decisions, armies, and daily administration. The Hojo period brought stability in many areas, yet it also depended on careful balance among warrior families. The government had to settle disputes, reward service, and keep local rivals from growing too independent. In the background were countless practical concerns: taxes, harvests, roads, piracy, temples, and the ordinary disputes that can make a government feel very close to everyday life. Fact 11. The Genpei War showed that the court could still challenge warrior power. In 1221, the retired emperor Go-Toba tried to restore stronger imperial authority and the Kamakura government, known as the Genpei War, ended with the Kamakura side victorious. The event mattered because it showed that the military government could defeat a major challenge from the court and then reshape landholding and politics in Kyoto. Yet the story is not one of a simple final victory over the emperor. The court survived, ceremonies continued, poetry continued, and emperors still mattered deeply in Japanese culture. Rather, the balance of power tilted further toward the warrior government. The Kamakura rulers became more confident in managing national affairs. It was another small but important turn in a long process by which samurai authority became normal, expected, and woven into the structure of the country. In the stillness of night, history can feel less like a list of dates and more like a landscape. Roofs, rivers, paper screens, fields of rice, and footsteps fading along a corridor. Fact 12. The Mongol invasions tested Japan's defenses in 1274 and 1281. In the 13th century, forces sent by the Mongol-led Yuan dynasty attacked Japan twice, first in 1274 and again in 1281. These invasions were frightening because they brought a large, organized foreign threat to the shores of Kyushu. Japanese defenders faced unfamiliar tactics, including coordinated formations and explosive weapons. The second invasion ended after long fighting, strong coastal defenses, supply problems, and destructive storms. Later tradition emphasized the storms as divine winds, or kamikaze. The storms were important, but they were not the whole story. Japanese fighters and local communities had spent years preparing defensive walls, patrols, and resistance. The invasions left a deep memory. The islands could be approached from the sea, and warrior governments had to think not only about rival clans, but also about threats from beyond Japan. Fact 13. The Mongol invasions created a financial problem for the Kamakura government. A victory can still be expensive. In many civil wars, a winning lord can reward followers with land taken from defeated enemies. The Mongol invasions offered no such easy reward. Samurai had defended the country, but there were few conquered estates to distribute afterward. Many fighters wanted recognition and compensation for their service. The Kamakura government struggled to satisfy these claims. At the same time, land holdings were being divided among heirs, which could make warrior families poorer over generations. This pressure did not destroy the shogunate overnight, but it weakened trust. A government built on reward and protection has a problem when it cannot reward enough people. The lesson is gentle but clear. Political systems often depend on quiet promises, and when those promises become harder to keep, even strong institutions can begin to loosen. You can picture the quiet spaces around this fact. The document on a desk, the sound of wind around a gate, and the patient rhythm of a life that does not appear in heroic paintings. Fact 14. Buddhist ideas shaped the emotional world of many warriors. Samurai did not all follow one religious path, and Japan's spiritual life included many Buddhist schools, Shinto traditions, local practices, and court rituals. Still, Buddhism was especially important in the medieval warrior world. Ideas about impermanence, discipline, death, compassion, and the uncertainty of life appeared in literature, temples, and personal practice. Zen Buddhism became influential among some military elites, especially in later centuries, though it was never the only spiritual tradition available to them. For people living with war, illness, and sudden political change, the idea that all things pass away could feel less abstract than it does in peaceful times. A temple bell, a garden stone, a bowl of tea, or a brief poem could become reminders to pay attention to the present moment. These quiet arts grew beside military life, not outside it. Fact 15. Women in warrior families could hold property and manage households. The samurai world included women whose roles were more varied than the popular image suggests. In different times and regions, women of warrior families could inherit property, manage estates, arrange households, supervise servants, protect family interests, and sometimes take part in defense. Their legal rights and practical authority changed over centuries, so there is no single rule that fits every era. But it is misleading to imagine samurai history as made only by men. Family strategy depended, inheritance, and careful management. Women often stood at the center of that work. In times of siege or crisis, some trained with weapons for defense. In quieter years, they kept accounts, raised children, maintained networks, and guarded the reputation of a household. The history of samurai families is therefore also a history of women's labor and decisions. Let the image become gentle now. The banners, roads, and rooms are far away, but the human wish for safety, purpose, and belonging remains easy to recognize. Fact 16. Tomo Gozen is a famous figure where history and legend meet. Tomoe Gozen appears in the tale of the Heike as a remarkable female warrior associated with Minamoto no Yoshinaka. The story describes her as beautiful, strong, and highly skilled in riding and archery. Whether every detail is historically exact is less certain than the power of the image she created. For centuries, artists and storytellers returned to her because she challenged narrow ideas about who could be brave or capable. Her story also shows the difference between history and memory. A literary figure can reveal what later people admired, feared, or imagined, even when the details cannot all be checked, like a tax record. In a calm way, Tomoe Gozen stands at the edge of fact and legend, reminding us that the samurai era was remembered through stories as much as through official documents. Fact 17. A samurai household was more than one warrior and one sword. A warrior household could include relatives, retainers, craftspeople, farmers, children, guests, and people whose status was very different from the lord at its center. A household needed food, clothing, repairs, horses, messengers, records, and trusted people to keep it running. In a castle town or rural estate, the visible warrior depended on many other hands. This is easy to forget, because paintings often focus on armor and banners. Yet daily life was built from cooking rice, mending roofs, washing clothes, carrying letters, tending animals, and arguing over boundaries. Samurai authority rested on this everyday labor. When we imagine a grand lord in formal robes, it is useful to picture the quieter rooms around him. Kitchens, storerooms, gardens, sleeping quarters, and the people who made the household function day after day. Let that detail rest for a moment. The samurai world was built not only from dramatic events, but from slow adjustments, ordinary work, and people trying to understand their place in a changing order. Fact 18. Many samurai were administrators as well as fighters. As warrior governments became more settled, samurai spent increasing amounts of time administering land and people. They inspected fields, handled complaints, collected dues, recorded boundaries, supervised roads, issued orders, and carried messages between offices. A skilled official needed literacy, memory, patience, and knowledge of local custom. In peaceful periods, these abilities could matter more than battlefield courage. This does not mean that weapons disappeared. Military identity remained important, and samurai trained, wore symbols of rank, and remembered famous battles. But the average day for many could be surprisingly quiet. Reading petitions, reviewing accounts, meeting village representatives, and making sure storehouses were secure. The long samurai era was not 1,000 years of constant fighting. It was a changing blend of war, government, culture, and routine. Fact 19. The bow remained important long after swords became famous. The katana is now the object most people associate with samurai, yet battlefield weapons changed with time and place. Bows were central in early mounted warfare. Later, spears, firearms, and formations became increasingly important. A sword was useful at close range and carried great symbolic weight. But it was not always the main weapon that decided a battle. This distinction matters because later art and film often make sword duels seem like the center of samurai warfare. In reality, commanders thought about terrain, numbers, supply, scouts, fortifications, horses, weather, and morale. A weapon was part of a larger system. The sword's fame grew because it was intimate, portable, beautiful, and linked with personal identity. But on a wide battlefield, a bow, a spear, or a gun could be far more decisive. In the stillness of night, history can feel less like a list of dates and more like a landscape. Roofs, rivers, paper screens, fields of rice, and footsteps fading along a corridor. Fact 20. Japanese swords were carefully made from selected steel, heat, and repeated shaping. A well-made Japanese sword was the result of specialized craft. Swordsmiths worked with tamahagan, a kind of steel produced from iron sand in traditional furnaces. They selected pieces of metal with different properties, heated them, folded and welded them, shaped the blade, and used controlled cooling to create a hard cutting edge with a tougher core. The process was demanding and required experience. Popular stories sometimes exaggerate folding, as though it made blades magically perfect. In reality, sword quality came from many decisions. The steel, the forging, the clay coating, the temperature, the quench, the polish, and the intended use. A finished blade also passed through the hands of polishers, scabbard makers, lacquer workers, and fittings specialists. A sword was not merely a weapon. It was a collaboration of crafts. Fact 21. Armor was built to protect while allowing movement. Samurai armor looks heavy in museums, but it was designed for mobility as well as defense. Many suits used small plates of iron or leather laced together with silk cords. This construction could bend with the body and spread the force of a blow. Helmets protected the head and often carried dramatic crests, face guards, shoulder pieces, sleeves, skirts, and shin guards created a layered appearance that was both functional and visually impressive. Armor changed as weapons changed. Earlier styles suited mounted archery, while later armor adapted to mass battles, spears, and firearms. Colors and lacing patterns could also signal family identity or taste. When we see a suit of armor under museum lights, it can look like a single object. In use, it was a carefully assembled system, worn with clothing, cords, weapons, and the confidence of someone trained to move inside it. You can picture the quiet spaces around this fact. The document on a desk, the sound of wind around a gate, and the patient rhythm of a life that does not appear in heroic paintings. Fact 22. Helmets could express identity as well as offer protection. A samurai helmet, or kabuto, was practical equipment, but it could also be a public statement. Some helmets carried horns, crescents, animals, plants, or bold shapes that made a leader recognizable in smoke and confusion. A crest could help allies see where an important commander stood. It could also project confidence before a battle began. In peaceful times, helmets were displayed, repaired, inherited, and admired as works of art. The materials were often modest at their core: iron, lacquer, leather, silk, wood, and paper. Yet the final effect could be startlingly elaborate. The helmet reminds us that war and theatre often touch. A commander wanted protection, but he also wanted to be seen. Visibility could guide troops, inspire followers, and make a name memorable long after the battle had ended. Fact 23. Commanders used banners, fans, drums, and signals to guide armies. Before radios and electronic maps, an army needed visible and audible ways to communicate. Banners marked units and family affiliations. Conch shells, drums, bells, flags, and messengers carried signals across fields or around castle walls. Commanders sometimes used war fans, which could serve as signs of rank and as tools for directing attention. The details varied by period and army, but the basic problem was always the same. How do you make thousands of people move together when noise, distance, fear, and dust make clear speech impossible? The answer was organization. Samurai warfare was not only individual bravery, it was coordination. Behind every famous duel or dramatic charge were people carrying messages, watching hillsides, sounding signals, and trying to make sense of a changing situation. Even in battle, communication was a form of survival. Let the image become gentle now. The banners, roads, and rooms are far away, but the human wish for safety, purpose, and belonging remains easy to recognize. Fact 24. Horses linked military power to land and wealth. In the early samurai world, a horse was more than transportation. It was an expensive military resource. It needed grazing land, feed, care, equipment, and skilled handling. A warrior who could maintain a horse usually had access to wealth or powerful support. Horse breeding and riding traditions developed in different regions, and mounted skills became part of elite culture. Horses were also sensitive creatures, easily affected by weather, noise, hunger, unfamiliar ground, and human emotion. A battle plan that looked simple on paper could become difficult when animals refused a slope or panicked at sudden sounds. This is why military history often rests on humble details. A lost horseshoe, a muddy road, a tired animal, or a narrow bridge could alter the movement of an army. In the samurai era, power often traveled on 4 careful legs. Fact 25. The Kamakura shogunate fell in 1333. By the early 14th century, the Kamakura government had grown strained by financial pressures, rivalries, and challenges to its authority. In 1333, forces loyal to Emperor Go-Daigo and allied warriors brought down the Hojo Regency and the Kamakura shogunate. The fall was dramatic, but it did not return Japan to a simple age of court rule. Warrior power was now too deeply rooted in the provinces. A brief imperial restoration followed, yet new conflicts quickly emerged. The fall of Kamakura teaches a calm historical lesson. Institutions can survive for generations, seem permanent, and still collapse when old tensions meet a moment of opportunity. The roads, estates, families, temples, and memories of the Kamakura era did not vanish. They flowed into the next political order, carrying old habits into new forms. Let that detail rest for a moment. The samurai world was built not only from dramatic events, but from slow adjustments, ordinary work, and people trying to understand their place in a changing order. Fact 26. The Ashikaga shoguns ruled from Kyoto during the Muromachi period. After the fall of Kamakura, the Ashikaga family established a new shogunate in Kyoto. Their era is often called the Muromachi period, after the district where their headquarters stood. This brought military rule physically closer to the imperial court and the old cultural capital. But the Ashikaga government did not control all regions equally. Provincial leaders retained strong local bases, and the country's political map was often uneven. Even so, the Muromachi period was a creative time. Trade, urban life, transport, art, poetry, gardens, and religious culture developed in new ways. Samurai lords could support painters, monks, tea masters, and performers while also preparing for conflict. The contrast is not as strange as it first seems. Political power needed culture to display refinement, legitimacy, and connection to the old traditions of Kyoto. Fact 27. Kyoto remained a center of art even when politics were unsettled. Kyoto was not merely a capital on a map. It was a storehouse of court traditions, temples, workshops, poetry, ceremony, and skilled crafts. During the Muromachi era, warrior rulers drew close to this cultural world. They collected Chinese paintings, supported Zen temples, sponsored gardens, and adopted new tastes in architecture and tea. The city also suffered terribly during periods of conflict, especially the Onin War. Yet it continued to shape what people considered elegant, learned, or prestigious. A provincial warlord might gain land through force, then seek painters, tea utensils, or court titles to make his status feel complete. This desire linked the battlefield to the workshop. In the quiet rooms of Kyoto, samurai culture absorbed older courtly ideals and transformed them into something new. In the stillness of night, history can feel less like a list of dates and more like a landscape. Roofs, rivers, paper screens, fields of rice, and footsteps fading along a corridor. Fact 28. Zen Buddhism influenced some warrior aesthetics, but it was not the whole of samurai life. Zen Buddhism is often closely linked with samurai in modern imagination. There is truth in the connection. Zen temples, monks, gardens, ink painting, poetry, and tea culture were important to many elite warriors, especially from the Muromachi period. Onward. Zen practice emphasized discipline, attention, and direct experience, qualities that could appeal to people living in a competitive world. Yet it is important not to make the connection too simple. Samurai followed many religious traditions, and not every warrior practiced Zen. Buddhism in Japan was diverse, as were Shinto practices and local beliefs. What Zen offered was a powerful style of cultural expression. Its quiet rooms, plain materials, and carefully composed spaces helped create an image of controlled simplicity that later generations strongly associated with the warrior ideal. Fact 29. Tea culture grew in close conversation with warrior society. Tea, in Japan, had long been valued as a drink and a social practice. But during the medieval and early modern periods, tea gatherings became places where taste, politics, hospitality, and status met. Warrior lords collected Chinese tea utensils, competed in identifying tea varieties, and later embraced more restrained forms of tea practice. A small room with a hanging scroll, a flower, a charcoal fire, and a carefully chosen bowl could become a place of focus amid a noisy world. The tea ceremony was never only about drinking tea. It involved attention to season, materials, guests, manners, and imperfection. For samurai, tea could be a pause from military business, but it could also be part of military business. A space to build trust, display refinement, and speak carefully with allies or rivals. You can picture the quiet spaces around this fact. The document on a desk, the sound of wind around a gate, and the patient rhythm of a life that does not appear in heroic paintings. Fact 30. No. Theatre became closely associated with warrior patrons. No theatre developed from older performance traditions and became especially important under warrior patronage. It is slow, stylized, musical, and full of controlled movement. A masked performer may take only a few careful steps, while a chorus and instruments create an atmosphere of memory, longing, ghosts, travel, or spiritual release. For a modern viewer used to fast storytelling, No can feel almost dreamlike. Its themes often include famous warriors, lost battles, and restless spirits who cannot leave the past behind. Samurai lords supported No because it offered cultural prestige and because its stories spoke to their world. The theatre did not simply praise warriors. It often showed the sadness beneath victory, the weight of regret, and the way violent events echo through later generations. Fact 31. Linked verse, poetry, connected people across different ranks. Renga, or linked verse, was a collaborative form of poetry in which participants composed verses one after another. It brought together court nobles, monks, warriors, and sometimes people from other backgrounds. Each verse responded to the one before it, shifting season, mood, image, or setting, while preserving a subtle connection. The result was a chain of thought made by a group. In the samurai era, Renga mattered because it gave warriors access to literary refinement and social networks. A lord who could compose poetry or sponsor a gathering showed more than education. He showed that he belonged in the wider cultural work. In a way, linked verse is a gentle model for history itself. One generation adds a line, another changes the mood. The poem continues, carrying traces of everyone who took part. Let the image become gentle now. The banners, roads, and rooms are far away, but the human wish for safety, purpose, and belonging remains easy to recognize. Fact 32. The Onin War damaged Kyoto and opened the door to a century of conflict. The Onin War, fought from 1467 to 1477, began among powerful families and became a devastating struggle centered on Kyoto. The city suffered fires, destruction, and political breakdown. The Ashikaga shogunate weakened badly, and many provincial lords gained more freedom to act on their own. The result was not one clean national war, but a long era of regional conflicts, often called the Sengoku period, or Age of Warring States. For ordinary people, this could mean uncertainty, changing taxes, armed bands, fortified villages, and local alliances. For ambitious leaders, it created opportunity. The Onin War is a reminder that a political crisis in one city can ripple outward for generations. When the center loses its grip, the edges become more important. Fact 33. The Sengoku period was a time of many regional wars, not one continuous national battle. The Sengoku era is often described as Japan's age of civil war. That is true, but it can make the period sound more uniform than it was. Different regions had different rivalries, landscapes, alliances, and rhythms of conflict. Some years were violent, others were occupied with harvests, marriages, negotiations, repairs, trade, and preparing for the next threat. Local lords built power through castles, land, surveys, laws, roads, markets, and alliances as much as through fighting. Villages could bargain, resist, cooperate, or seek protection from competing leaders. Temples and leagues also held influence in some areas. The period was unsettled, but it was not empty. It was full of people finding ways to live through uncertainty. That quiet resilience is as much part of the story as any famous battle. Let that detail rest for a moment. The samurai world was built not only from dramatic events, but from slow adjustments, ordinary work, and people trying to understand their place in a changing order. Fact 34. Daimyo were powerful territorial lords, whose authority depended on land and followers. The word daimyo is often translated as great name. In the Sengoku and early Edo periods, daimyo were major lords who controlled domains, retainers, castles, and resources. Their strength came from a mix of land, military force, administration, family ties, and reputation. A daimyo needed to know how much rice his lands produced, how many men could be called, which roads were passable, and which neighbors might become enemies. He also needed trusted retainers who could govern districts and command troops. Some daimyo built large regional states that were almost small countries. Yet their power could be fragile. A failed harvest, a disputed succession, betrayal, or a stronger neighbor could undo years of work. Behind the grand title was an endless need for information and careful management. Fact 35. Castles became centers of government as well as places of defense. Japanese castles were not simply stone fortresses, like those seen in parts of Europe. They combined earthworks, moats, wooden buildings, gates, watchtowers, walls, and sometimes towering keeps. In the Sengoku period, many fortifications were placed on hills or mountains, where terrain offered protection. Later, as political control became more organized, castles often became centers of castle towns. Officials worked there. Storehouses held rice. Retainers lived nearby. Merchants and artisans gathered around the protected center. A castle could therefore be a military site, an office complex, a symbol of rank, and the heart of an urban community. The best defenses were often subtle: turning paths, hidden angles, narrow gates, steep slopes, and layered enclosures. A visitor could be guided slowly through spaces designed to make movement predictable and defense easier. In the stillness of night, history can feel less like a list of dates and more like a landscape. Roofs, rivers, paper screens, fields of rice, and footsteps fading along a corridor. Fact 36. Samurai status was more fluid in the late medieval world than later pictures suggest. The tidy social categories, often associated with Edo Japan, did not fully describe the earlier medieval centuries. During the Sengoku era, skilled people could rise through service, local influence, trade, military ability, or the favor of a lord. Some families that later appeared firmly. Samurai had more mixed origins. Farmers could serve in armed roles. Local leaders could gain recognition. Religious institutions could field armed supporters. The boundaries between occupations and statuses were often negotiated rather than fixed. This does not mean society was equal. Hierarchies were real and could be harsh, but the path into power was sometimes more open than later. Ideals implied. The calm lesson is that social labels become clearer in hindsight. In lived history, people move, adapt, marry, serve, and find unexpected ways to change their place. Fact 37. Ashigaru foot soldiers became increasingly important in late medieval warfare. Ashigaru were foot soldiers, and their role grew in the warfare of the 15th and 16th centuries. They could carry spears, bows, firearms, supply or tools for building and siege work. Some were drawn from farming communities, while others became more professional soldiers in a lord's service. Their growing importance reflected a larger change in warfare. Battles were no longer centered only on small groups of mounted elite warriors. Larger armies needed organized infantry, officers, logistics, and discipline. Ashigaru often did much of the hard, uncelebrated work: marching, digging, guarding, carrying, and holding lines. Their presence is a useful correction to the glamorous image of samurai combat. Armies were collective machines. They depended on many people whose names were rarely preserved in poems or paintings. You can picture the quiet spaces around this fact. The document on a desk, the sound of wind around a gate, and the patient rhythm of a life that does not appear in heroic paintings. Fact 38. The spear became one of the most practical weapons on late medieval battlefields. A spear could be made more quickly, and in greater numbers than a fine sword. It gave a foot soldier reach and could be used in formations. In the crowded, changing battles of the Sengoku period, spears became deeply important. A long spear line could help control space, defend against cavalry, and support coordinated movement. Training and discipline mattered because a weapon works differently in a group than in a duel. The spear also reminds us that military success is often practical rather than romantic. A polished blade may be beautiful, but an inexpensive weapon used well by many people can shape history more directly. For the tired mind, there is something almost simple about this. Long shafts, steady hands, a line of people trying to hold their ground together. Fact 39. Firearms reached Japan in the 16th century and changed military planning. Portuguese traders brought matchlock firearms to Japan in the 16th century, traditionally linked to Tanegashima in 1543. Japanese makers soon copied and adapted the technology. Guns did not instantly replace bows, spears, or swords, but they changed what commanders had to consider. Firearms required powder, shot, maintenance, training, weather awareness, and coordinated timing. They could be powerful in defense, during sieges, and in large formations. Japanese leaders and craftspeople proved highly capable of producing and using them. The arrival of guns is a useful reminder that the samurai era was not frozen in tradition. It was responsive to trade, foreign contact, new tools, and practical experiment. A warrior culture could value old symbols while still adopting a weapon that changed the sound and rhythm of battle. Let the image become gentle now. The banners, roads, and rooms are far away, but the human wish for safety, purpose, and belonging remains easy to recognize. Fact 40. The Battle of Nagashino is famous, but simple legends about it can mislead. The 1575 Battle of Nagashino is often presented as a neat story in which firearms suddenly defeated cavalry through perfectly timed volleys behind wooden barricades. The real event was more complicated. Firearms mattered, defensive preparation mattered, terrain mattered, and the forces involved made choices based on the pressures of the moment. But historians caution against treating them instant when old warfare and modern warfare began. Military change is usually slower. Commanders adapt weapons over many campaigns. Armies experiment. Supply systems adjust. Older methods continue alongside newer ones. Nagashino remains important because it shows a period in which guns, fortifications, and organized infantry were becoming central. Yet, it also teaches a sleepy historian's lesson. The cleanest story is not always the truest one. Fact 41. Oda Nobunaga was one of the major figures in Japan's 16th century unification. Oda Nobunaga began as a regional lord in central Japan and became one of the most powerful figures of the Sengoku age. He used alliances, military force, castle building, trade policies, and political calculation to expand his influence. His career was dramatic, but it was not a solo journey. He depended on retainers local supporters, changing alliances, and the weakness of rivals. Nobunaga is often remembered for boldness and for his willingness to challenge old structures. Yet the Japan he moved through was already full of change. Cities grew, guns spread, religious institutions held power, and regional lords competed intensely. In 1582, Nobunaga died during a rebellion by one of his own generals. His life shows how quickly power could rise in the Sengoku world, and how quickly it could be interrupted. Let that detail rest for a moment. The samurai world was built not only from dramatic events, but from slow adjustments, ordinary work, and people trying to understand their place in a changing order. Fact 42. Toyotomi Hideyoshi rose from humble origins to unify most of Japan. Toyotomi Hideyoshi followed Nobunaga and completed much of the military unification of Japan by the end of the 16th century. His rise was unusual, and later stories emphasized his relatively humble beginnings. As a ruler, he worked to stabilize control through land surveys, castle-building regulations, and the reorganization of military service. He also built magnificent spaces, including Osaka Castle, that displayed wealth and authority. Hideyoshi's government was energetic and far-reaching, but it depended heavily on his personal leadership. He sought to create clearer boundaries between warriors and farmers, although real life did not always fit official categories neatly. His career reveals another pattern of the age. Extraordinary ambition could reshape the country, but personal rule could also leave uncertainty when the ruler died. Fact 43. Land surveys helped rulers measure the resources behind their power. Hideyoshi's land surveys, often called Taiko Kenshi, were efforts to measure fields, estimate productivity, record obligations, and identify who controlled what. For a government, this information was invaluable. It helped determine taxes, military capacity, and the value of a domain. Rice production became a key way of estimating wealth, commonly measured in koku, a unit linked to the amount of rice, thought to feed one person for a year. A survey may sound dry beside tales of castles and armies. It was one of the foundations of political power. Rulers needed numbers. They needed to know which fields were wet or dry, which villages produced more, and how much could be collected without breaking the people who grew it. The quiet mathematics of land could decide the fate of warriors. In the stillness of night, history can feel less like a list of dates and more like a landscape. Roofs, rivers, paper screens, fields of rice, and footsteps fading along a corridor. Fact 44. The sword hunt was part of an attempt to control weapons and social roles. In 1588, Hideyoshi issued an order often known as the sword hunt, calling for the collection of weapons from farmers and religious institutions. The policy is sometimes described too simply as a single, clean dividing line between samurai and peasants. In reality, the process of separating roles unfolded over time and varied by region. Still, the order shows what rulers wanted: fewer armed challenges outside their control, clearer authority, and a more stable social order. It also reveals the importance of weapons in daily life. A sword, spear, or gun could be a tool of defense, status, rebellion, or local influence. By regulating who could carry weapons, a government tried to regulate who could make claims through force. Politics could enter even the most personal object at a person's side. Fact 45. Hideyoshi's invasions of Korea showed the limits of unification at home. After unifying much of Japan, Hideyoshi launched invasions of Korea in 1592, and again in 1597 with ambitions that extended toward Ming China. The campaigns were costly, destructive, and ultimately unsuccessful. They drew Japanese forces across the sea into a war that involved Korean resistance, the Joseon state, Ming military intervention, naval conflict, supply problems, and difficult terrain. For the samurai world, the invasions offered opportunities for command and reward, but they also strained resources and exposed the limits of military ambition. Hideyoshi died in 1598, and Japanese forces withdrew. The episode is important because it reminds us that the samurai era was connected to East Asian history, not sealed inside the islands. Decisions made in Japanese castles could affect communities far across the sea. You can picture the quiet spaces around this fact, the document on a desk, the sound of wind around a gate, and the patient rhythm of a life that does not appear in heroic paintings. Fact 46. Tokugawa Ieyasu emerged victorious after the Battle of Sekigahara. In 1600, the Battle of Sekigahara became a decisive event in the struggle for power after Hideyoshi's death. Tokugawa Ieyasu defeated rival forces and gradually established a new military government. Like many famous battles, Sekigahara has a dramatic afterlife full of individual stories, shifting loyalties, and memorable betrayals. Yet, its importance lies in what followed. Ieyasu built a political order that lasted for more than 2.5 centuries. The Tokugawa system did not eliminate every conflict, but it reduced large-scale civil war and created a long period of relative stability. For samurai, this changed everything. A class built around fighting had to learn how to live in peace. Some became officials. Some became scholars. Some struggled with debt. Many discovered that the hardest discipline was not winning a battle, but enduring routine. Fact 47. The Tokugawa shogunate began in 1603. In 1603, Tokugawa Ieyasu received the title of shogun, beginning the Tokugawa shogunate. Its center was Edo, the city that later became Tokyo. Kyoto remained home to the emperor and court, but Edo became the center of military government. The Tokugawa rulers carefully managed relations among daimyo, controlled strategic lands, regulated marriages and castles, and created systems that made it difficult for any rival lord to grow too independent. Their rule is often called the Edo period, which lasted until 1868. It was a time of peace compared with the Sengoku era, but not a time without change. Cities expanded, literacy rose, commerce grew, popular culture flourished, and the samurai class slowly became more tied to administration than combat. Let the image become gentle now. The banners, roads, and rooms are far away. But the human wish for safety, purpose, and belonging remains easy to recognize. Fact 48. The laws of military households set expectations for daimyo and warriors. In 1615, after the final defeat of the Toyotomi family at Osaka, the Tokugawa government issued regulations commonly known as the laws of military households, or Buke Shohato. These rules addressed the behavior of daimyo and warriors. They dealt with matters such as castle repair, marriage alliances, military readiness, and conduct. The purpose was not merely moral, it was political. A lord who could freely repair fortifications, arrange powerful marriages, or gather large forces might become a threat. By turning such actions into regulated matters, the shogunate made the country more predictable from its own point of view. Rules can seem quiet beside battles, but they are often how peace is built. The Tokugawa order rested on watchfulness, paperwork, ritual, and a careful awareness of what powerful people were doing. Fact 49. The system of alternate attendance kept daimyo tied to Edo. One of the best-known Tokugawa policies was sankin kotai, often translated as alternate attendance. Daimyo were required to spend periods in Edo and periods in their own domains. Their families were generally expected to remain in Edo, which created a powerful incentive for loyalty. The journeys to and from the capital could be elaborate, with long processions of retainers, horses, banners, and supplies. These trips cost money and demanded planning. That expense helped prevent lords from accumulating unlimited military resources at home. At the same time, the system connected regions to Edo, encouraged travel along major roads, and supported inns, shops, carriers, and artisans. A policy intended to secure political control also shaped the rhythm of daily life for people far from the shogun's castle. Let that detail rest for a moment. The samurai world was built not only from dramatic events, but from slow adjustments, ordinary work, and people trying to understand their place in a changing order. Fact 50. Daimyo were classified partly by their relationship to the Tokugawa house. The Tokugawa government distinguished among different kinds of daimyo. Fudai daimyo were hereditary allies who had supported the Tokugawa before the decisive victory at Sekigahara. Tozama daimyo, meaning outside lords, had joined later, or had been less closely tied to the Tokugawa. This classification influenced which offices lords could hold and how closely they were watched. Some Tozama domains remained extremely wealthy and powerful, even if they were kept away from the highest central positions. The system was a subtle map of trust. It did not simply divide good people from bad people. It recorded the memory of political history and turned it into an administrative structure. In the Tokugawa world, an alliance made decades earlier could still shape a family's opportunities generations later. Fact 51. Edo grew into one of the world's great cities. Edo began as a castle town, but under Tokugawa rule, it grew into a vast urban center. Samurai residences, government offices, temples, shrines, merchant districts, workshops, bridges, markets, and waterways filled the city. Daimyo maintained estates there, while their retainers, servants, and suppliers created large surrounding communities. The city was vulnerable to fire, flood, disease, and crowding, yet it repeatedly rebuilt and expanded. For samurai, living in Edo could mean a very different life from the old image of a provincial warrior. Many walked to offices, attended formal duties, lived in compact quarters, borrowed money, read books, visited theaters, and navigated a complicated city full of people from every social background. The samurai era was not only rural and martial. It was also urban, busy, and remarkably connected. In the stillness of night, history can feel less like a list of dates and more like a landscape. Roofs, rivers, paper screens, fields of rice and footsteps fading along a corridor. Fact 52. Alternate attendance helped create a national network of roads and services. The long processions of daimyo traveling to Edo did more than display power. They helped support and standardize networks of roads, post stations, inns, bridges, ferries, and suppliers. Travelers needed food, lodging, horses, porters, guides, and repairs. Villages along major routes could benefit from this movement, though they could also bear the burden of serving official travelers. The roads linked regions that had once felt far apart. News, fashions, books, goods, and ideas moved along them. A samurai traveling from a western domain to Edo might pass mountain passes, river crossings, tea houses, crowded post towns, and fields ready for harvest. The journey could be tiring, expensive, ceremonial, and beautiful. In a peaceful age, movement itself became one of the ways power held the country together. Fact 53. Peace turned many samurai into civil officials. Once large-scale warfare became rare, many samurai had to find purpose in government work. They served as magistrates, tax officials, guards, clerks, teachers, inspectors, engineers, and advisors. Some managed domain finances. Others supervised construction, forests, granaries, or justice. Their swords remained symbols of status, but their daily tools might be brushes, paper, seals, and account books. This transformation could be difficult. A family proud of battlefield ancestors might now depend on a modest stipend and office routine. Yet administrative skill could also become a new kind of honor. A careful official who prevented famine, settled disputes fairly, or kept records clean might serve his lord more effectively than a reckless fighter. The samurai identity adapted. It did not vanish in peace, it became more bureaucratic. You can picture the quiet spaces around this fact. The document on a desk, the sound of wind around a gate, and the patient rhythm of a life that does not appear in heroic paintings. Fact 54. Samurai stipends were often measured in rice. In Tokugawa, Japan, many samurai received stipends connected to rice, either as actual rice or as an amount valued in rice. This made sense in an agrarian economy where rice was a major measure of wealth and taxation. But a rice stipend could be complicated. A samurai family needed cash for clothing, housing, education, travel, ceremonies, and everyday purchases. Selling rice or converting its value linked samurai households to merchants and markets. When prices shifted, a fixed stipend might not stretch as far as it once did. This is why some samurai households lived with financial pressure despite their high status. Wealth on paper did not always equal comfort at home. The calm image of a warrior receiving a rice stipend hides a very ordinary problem: how to make a household budget work month after month. Fact 55. Many samurai families fell into debt during the Edo period. The long peace of the Edo period brought stability, but it did not guarantee prosperity. Some samurai families had fixed incomes, while the costs of city life, formal obligations, travel and education kept rising. Merchants became important lenders, and a samurai household might borrow money to maintain appearances or meet required expenses. This could create an uncomfortable reversal of status. A merchant, officially lower in the social order, might hold the debt of a samurai, officially higher. The economy did not always obey the ideal hierarchy. Some domains tried reforms, urging thrift, cutting expenses, or reorganizing finances. But debt was persistent. It reminds us that the samurai era contained many quiet anxieties. A letter from a creditor, a worn robe repaired again, a family discussion about how to pay for a child's future. Let the image become gentle now. The banners, roads, and rooms are far away, but the human wish for safety, purpose, and belonging remains easy to recognize. Fact 56. Tokugawa policy limited the number of castles in each domain. After the wars of unification, the Tokugawa government encouraged the dismantling of many fortifications through a policy, often summarized as one castle per domain. The goal was simple. Fewer castles meant fewer places from which a rival could resist. Major castles remained as simsals and administrative centers, while many smaller strongholds disappeared or changed purpose. This policy reshaped the landscape. In the Sengoku period, hillsides had been filled with defenses. In the Tokugawa era, power became more concentrated in designated castle towns. The change also signaled a new way of thinking. A lord was expected to govern from an approved center rather than maintain a web of private military bases. Peace was not only the absence of battle. It was the redesign of physical space, so that battle would be harder to begin. Fact 57. Himeji Castle shows how defense and beauty could be combined. Himeji Castle in Western Japan is one of the finest surviving examples of early 17th century Japanese castle architecture. Its white plastered walls, layered roofs, winding passages, gates, and defensive design make it both elegant and formidable. The building looks graceful from a distance, yet its paths were designed to slow and confuse attackers. A visitor could be guided through turns, slopes, narrow gates, and exposed spaces before reaching the central keep. Himeji shows that military architecture was not only about thickness and height, it was about controlling movement, sightlines, and uncertainty. And its beauty was part of its power, too. A grand castle, the wealth, refinement, and authority of its lord. In the calm moonlight of imagination, the white roofs seem almost weightless, though they were built to survive a dangerous world. Let that detail rest for a moment. The samurai world was built not only from dramatic events, but from slow adjustments, ordinary work, and people trying to understand their place in a changing order. Fact 58. Tokugawa Japan restricted foreign relations, but it was not completely isolated. The Edo period is sometimes described as a time when Japan closed itself completely to the world. That is too simple. The Tokugawa government placed strong restrictions on foreign contact and overseas travel, especially from the 1630s onward. But controlled trade and diplomacy continued. Chinese and Dutch merchants traded at Nagasaki. Relations continued with Korea through diplomatic channels. The Ryukyu kingdom and Ainu communities were also part of important regional connections, though these relationships were shaped by unequal power. Knowledge, goods, books, medicine, and ideas still entered Japan. The country was regulated, not sealed in a glass box. This matters because samurai officials had to manage a world that was quieter than the age of civil war, but still connected to wider East Asia, and, through trade, to Europe and beyond. Fact 59. Nagasaki was a carefully controlled window onto the wider world. Nagasaki played a special role in Tokugawa foreign relations. It was a port where Chinese and Dutch traders could conduct limited commerce under close supervision. Goods arriving there included silk, books, medicines, instruments, sugar, information. Japanese scholars interested in Western learning, later known as Rangaku or Dutch studies, often depended on materials that passed through Nagasaki. For samurai officials, the port represented both opportunity and concern. Foreign knowledge could be useful, but foreign influence had to be watched. The city became a place where global currents met a tightly managed political order. It is a restful image to hold. Ships arriving after long voyages, warehouses near the water, translators and officials reading unfamiliar documents, and objects from distant places beginning a new life in Japan. In the stillness of night, history can feel less like a list of dates and more like a landscape. Roofs, rivers, paper screens, fields of rice, and footsteps fading along a corridor. Fact 60. Relations with Korea remained important during the Edo period. After the devastation of Hideyoshi's invasions, Japan and Korea gradually restored diplomatic relations under the Tokugawa. Korean diplomatic missions traveled to Japan on several occasions, bringing scholars, artists, officials, and gifts. These journeys were carefully staged and politically meaningful. They showed that peace and communication could be rebuilt after war, although the relationship remained shaped by the difficult memories of the past. For Japanese viewers, the missions were impressive public events. For Korean participants, they required long travel and delicate diplomacy. This history is important because it widens the samurai story beyond the islands. Edo Japan was not only speaking to itself, it was part of a region where states watched one another, exchanged knowledge, remembered conflict, and sought ways to maintain stability. Fact 61. The Ainu and Ryukyu peoples had their own histories beyond the samurai ideal. The story of samurai Japan often centers the main islands and their warrior governments, but the wider region included peoples and kingdoms with distinct histories. The Ainu, whose traditional homelands include Hokkaido and surrounding areas, had their own culture, trade networks, and political experiences. The Ryukyu Kingdom, centered on Okinawa, maintained important connections with China, Japan, Korea, and Southeast Asia. Samurai domains and the Tokugawa state interacted with both through trade, control, and expansion. These relationships were often unequal and could be coercive. Including them helps prevent the samurai era from seeming like one closed national story. Japan's political world had edges, crossings, and people whose lives were not defined by the same warrior institutions. History becomes more accurate when its quiet margins are allowed to speak too. You can picture the quiet spaces around this fact, the document on a desk, the sound of wind around a gate, and the patient rhythm of a life that does not appear in heroic paintings. Fact 62. Bushido was formalized gradually and was never one unchanging rule book. Bushido is often translated as the way of the warrior. Modern popular culture sometimes presents it as an ancient and universal code followed by every samurai in exactly the same way. The historical picture is more complex. Ideas about loyalty, courage, honor, duty, learning, and self-control existed in many forms across the warrior centuries. But the term Bushido and the idealized code associated with it became especially formalized during the peaceful Edo period. When writers look back on warrior identity, different authors emphasized different values. Some stressed loyalty to a lord, others stressed learning, restraint, or readiness for death. No single book governed every samurai. Bushido was part memory, part moral teaching, part social ideal, and later part national myth. Its power comes partly from the fact that people kept reshaping it. Fact 63. Honor meant different things in different places and centuries. Honor was important in samurai culture, but it did not have one fixed meaning. A warrior could seek honor through military skill, loyalty, careful service, family reputation, learning, generosity, or success in office. A lord might value obedience. A retainer might value fair reward. A household might care deeply about marriage alliances and the behavior of its members. In some situations, preserving face could matter greatly. In others, practical compromise was wiser. The idea of honor often appears simple in films, because a single character must make a clear choice. In real life, people balanced many obligations at once, to parents, children, ancestors, a lord, a domain, a temple, and their own survival. The result was not always heroic or peaceful, but it was human. Let the image become gentle now. The banners, roads, and rooms are far away, but the human wish for safety, purpose, and belonging remains easy to recognize. Fact 64. Seppuku was a serious ritual practice, not an everyday event. Seppuku, sometimes called harakiri in popular language, was a form of ritual suicide associated with some warrior contexts. It could occur after defeat as punishment, or in moments of intense political and personal crisis. It has become one of the most famous images of samurai culture, but it should not be treated as ordinary daily behavior or as a simple romantic gesture. Its meanings changed over time, and its reality was often shaped by rules, witnesses, social expectations, and deep pressure. The practice is a difficult subject because it touches death and coercion, as well as ideals of honor. For a gentle history, it is enough to remember that the samurai world could be harsh. Beneath the polished stories of loyalty were real human costs, and not every tradition deserves to be glorified. Fact 65. The story of the 47 Ronin became a lasting tale of loyalty and debate. The 47 Ronin story began with a real 18th century incident. After their lord Asano Naganori died following a conflict at Edo Castle, his retainers became Ronin, or masterless samurai. Nearly 2 years later, they killed the official they blamed and then surrendered. The shogunate ordered them to die by seppuku. Their story quickly became famous through plays, books, prints, and later films. It was admired as an example of loyalty, yet it also raised questions. Had the men acted honorably, or had they violated the peace and law that the Tokugawa government was trying to preserve? The story endured because it holds both feelings at once. It is about devotion, but also about the tension between private loyalty and public order. Let that detail rest for a moment. The samurai world was built not only from dramatic events, but from slow adjustments, ordinary work, and people trying to understand their place in a changing order. Fact 66. A Ronin was a samurai without a lord, and that could be a difficult condition. A Ronin literally means a wave person, suggesting someone who drifts without a fixed place. In practice, a Ronin was a samurai without a master or formal appointment. This could happen when a lord died, a domain was reduced, a family lost favor, or a government reorganization removed positions. Some Ronin found new service. Others became teachers, guards, writers, artists, merchants, or wanderers. A few became famous in stories for their independence, but many faced insecurity. Without a stipend or a household to support them, life could be precarious. The Ronin figure became attractive in later fiction because it represents freedom mixed with loneliness. It is the image of a person who carries training and status, but no longer has a clear place to use them. Fact 67. Miyamoto Musashi became famous through both history and later storytelling. Miyamoto Musashi is remembered as a swordsman, writer, and artist associated with the late 16th and early 17th centuries. Han. He is often linked with a two-sword style, and with a book called The Book of Five Rings. Musashi's life has been enlarged by later stories, making it difficult to separate every historical detail from legend. But his lasting appeal is easy to understand. He represents the wandering warrior who seeks mastery through observation, practice, and self-discipline. His writing about strategy in broad terms, not just sword fighting. They consider timing, perception, preparation, and the need to understand changing circumstances. Later, readers turned Musashi into many things: a martial artist, a philosopher, a symbol of independence, and a character in popular culture. Like many samurai figures, he lives in the space between history and imagination. In the stillness of night, history can feel less like a list of dates and more like a landscape. Roofs, rivers, paper screens, fields of rice, and footsteps fading along a corridor. Fact 68. Education became an important part of samurai identity during the long peace. In the Edo period, many samurai received training in reading, writing, Confucian thought, history, ethics, administration, and sometimes mathematics or military studies. Domain schools educated the sons of samurai families, while other forms of schooling served townspeople and villagers. The purpose was practical as well as moral. A government needed literate officials who could understand laws, keep records, and communicate clearly. Learning also became a marker of refinement. The ideal samurai was increasingly expected to cultivate both bu, the martial arts, and bun, the civil or cultural arts. This double ideal could be demanding. A young man might study classics in the morning, practice archery or swordsmanship later, and learn formal manners as well. The warrior was expected not merely to fight, but to become a disciplined person of letters. Fact 69. Literacy and publishing grew far beyond the samurai class. The Edo period saw a remarkable growth in education, printing, and reading. Samurai schools mattered, but they were not the whole story. Merchants, artisans, and villagers also learned to read and write in growing numbers through local schools and practical instruction. Publishers produced guidebooks, novels, poetry collections, illustrated books, manuals, maps, and popular tales. This wider reading culture changed the samurai world too. A warrior's reputation could now travel through printed stories. Famous battles became entertainment. Advice books explained proper conduct. Satirical works made fun of social pretensions. The written word became part of daily life in cities and towns. In a quiet room, a samurai and a merchant might both be reading, though perhaps not the same book, and not for the same reason. The old monopoly on knowledge was slowly loosening. You can picture the quiet spaces around this fact. The document on a desk, the sound of wind around a gate, and the patient rhythm of a life that does not appear in heroic paintings. Fact 70. No remained an elite art, while kabuki became a major popular theater. During the Tokugawa period, no theater retained strong support from the shogunate and daimyo. For its formal movements and classical stories suited elite taste. Kabuki, by contrast, became a lively popular theatre associated with urban audiences. Colorful costumes, music, dramatic gestures, and stories of love, revenge, fashion, and famous warriors. The two forms show the range of Edo culture. Samurai might attend or sponsor refined performances, while townspeople crowded into theatres for excitement and spectacle. Yet, the categories were not sealed. Samurai stories appeared in kabuki. Merchant wealth supported artistic life. Actors and printmakers shaped the public image of warriors. A samurai could be a real official by day and a theatrical hero by night. In Edo, Japan, the boundary between social order and popular imagination was always being tested. Fact 71. Woodblock prints helped spread images of famous warriors. Ukiyo-e woodblock prints made images available to a wide urban audience. Artists created prints of actors, courtesans, landscapes, sumo wrestlers, ghosts, fashionable places, and historical warriors. Samurai from old tales could become visual celebrities, even centuries after they had lived. Prints were relatively affordable compared with hand-painted scrolls, and they circulated widely. They did not simply record history. They interpreted it. A print might make a warrior look more dramatic, a battle more exciting, or a legend more emotionally clear than the messy past had been. In this way, Edo artists helped create the samurai image that later generations inherited. The bright colors and bold lines of a print could turn an old name into a familiar face. History became something to buy, display, discuss, and dream about. Let the image become gentle now. The banners, roads, and rooms are far away, but the human wish for safety, purpose, and belonging remains easy to recognize. Fact 72. Calligraphy and poetry were valued skills for many samurai. A samurai official often needed a steady hand with a brush. Calligraphy was not only beautiful writing, it reflected education, discipline, and personal style. Letters, records, poems, and formal documents all depended on skilled handwriting. Poetry, too, remained important. A short verse could mark a season, a farewell, a journey, or a moment of reflection. In samurai culture, literary ability did not erase the reality of violence, but it offered another language for experience. A warrior might write about autumn grass, snow on a bridge, or the sound of rain, even while living in a world shaped by politics and duty. This pairing of martial and literary arts can seem surprising today. Yet, for many people in the era, cultivation was part of what made authority seem worthy of respect. Fact 73. Tea rooms offered a small, controlled world inside a larger political one. A tea room could be small enough to make rank feel less important for a little while. Guests entered through a low door, sat close to the floor, and focused on simple objects. A tea bowl, a scoop, a kettle, a flower, a scroll. The setting was carefully arranged, but it aimed at calm rather than display. Warrior lords and their retainers valued tea because it created a temporary space of attention. A meeting could be ceremonial, friendly, political, or quietly strategic. The same person who commanded soldiers might pause to notice the glaze on a bowl or the sound of water heating. Tea did not make the political world disappear, but it offered a disciplined way to step outside its noise. For a moment, the room itself became the whole world. Let that detail rest for a moment. The samurai world was built not only from dramatic events, but from slow adjustments, ordinary work, and people trying to understand their place in a changing order. Fact 74. Samurai women also participated in education, arts, and household strategy. In the Edo period, women from samurai households could receive education suited to their family's position. This might include reading, writing, etiquette, moral instruction, household management, poetry, sewing, and sometimes martial training. Their lives were shaped by strong social expectations, and opportunities varied by rank and place. Still, they were not passive figures standing at the edge of history. Marriage connected political families. Mothers and grandmothers shaped children who would inherit offices. Women managed household finances and preserved family memory. Some became skilled in tea, calligraphy, or other arts. In times of crisis, women could defend residences or make difficult decisions about survival. The samurai era's public records often focus on men, but the stability of warrior households depended on women's intelligence, work, and endurance. Fact: he fives. A samurai residence was a place of ritual, work, and family life. The home of a samurai could range from a modest townhouse to a large compound with gates, gardens, reception rooms, storerooms, servants' quarters, and formal spaces for visitors. Inside, daily life followed seasons and duties. Shoes came off at the entrance. Rooms were divided by sliding screens. Tatami mats shaped how people sat and moved. A household might keep weapons, documents, family tablets, clothing, gifts, and food stores in carefully managed spaces. Formal rooms could display scrolls or flower arrangements when important guests arrived. More private rooms held the ordinary clutter of life: children's things, sewing, repairs, letters, and meals. The residence was where status became visible, but also where it had to be maintained through constant, unglamorous effort. In the stillness of night, history can feel less like a list of dates and more like a landscape. Roofs, rivers, paper screens, fields of rice, and footsteps fading along a corridor. Fact 76. Travel on the major roads was regulated but common enough to shape culture. The Tokugawa government regulated travel through checkpoints and permits, especially for certain people and goods. Yet travel still occurred constantly. Daimyo processions moved between domains and Edo. Pilgrims visited temples and shrines. Merchants carried goods. Messengers delivered documents. Workers sought opportunity. Major roads, such as the Tokaido, became famous routes lined with post towns, inns, shops, ferries, and scenic views. For samurai, travel could be official duty, family obligation, or an enforced part of alternate attendance. It could also bring contact with people and places beyond one's home domain. A journey offered dust, rain, tired feet, river crossings, mountain views, and the relief of a warm meal at an inn. The roads made Japan feel both larger and more connected. Fact 77. The Tokaido became one of the most famous routes in Japan. The Tokaido linked Edo and Kyoto along the eastern coast. It was not just a road, it was a cultural pathway. Travelers crossed rivers, passed checkpoints, stopped at post stations, and watched changing landscapes of sea, fields, hills, and villages. Artist Leihita made the route famous through woodblock prints, especially images of its 53 stations. For samurai, the road could be part of official travel. For ordinary people, it might be a pilgrimage, a business trip, or a rare adventure. The Tokaido shows how a peaceful government could make movement visible and organized. A road carries more than bodies. It carries rumors, songs, fashions, prices, jokes, books, and ideas. By the time a traveler reached the next inn, the world might already feel slightly different. You can picture the quiet spaces around this fact. The document on a desk, the sound of wind around a gate, and the patient rhythm of a life that does not appear in heroic paintings. Fact 78. Famine and hardship affected samurai and commoners alike, though not in the same way. Long peace did not protect everyone from hunger. The Edo period experienced famines, crop failures, floods, cold weather, disease, and economic hardship. Villagers often suffered first and most severely, because their lives depended directly on harvests. But samurai officials also faced pressure when taxes fell, granaries emptied, and hungry communities demanded relief. A domain's stability could depend on how it managed food stores, prices, loans, and public works. Some reforms tried to improve agriculture or promote thrift. Others imposed burdens that made life harder. This side of the samurai era is important because it brings us back to the basics. Beneath political rituals were ordinary needs: rice, water, shelter, medicine, and fair treatment. A government's true strength was tested not only in war, but during a bad harvest. Fact 79. 18th century reforms tried to strengthen troubled domains. As financial pressures grew, many domains and shogunal officials attempted reforms. They encouraged thrift, tried to reduce luxury spending, improved land surveys, promoted new crops, repaired irrigation, and sought better ways to collect revenue. Some reforms were careful and effective for a time. Others were unpopular or failed because they demanded too much from people already under strain. Reformers often faced a difficult balance. They wanted to strengthen government finances, but they also needed farmers and townspeople to survive. The story may sound distant, but it is familiar. Leaders look at numbers, worry about debt, and try to make a system work better without causing more pain. Samurai officials became deeply involved in this work. The peaceful age gave them fewer battles, but plenty of hard problems. Let the image become gentle now. The banners, roads, and rooms are far away, but the human wish for safety, purpose, and belonging remains easy to recognize. Fact 80. Merchants became economically powerful, even though samurai ranked above them officially. The Tokugawa social order is often summarized as warriors, farmers, artisans, and merchants. This formula captured an ideal hierarchy with samurai at the top. But economic reality was more complicated. Merchants could become wealthy through trade, finance, shipping, wholesaling, and urban markets. Samurai, meanwhile, often relied on fixed stipends and borrowed money. A rich merchant might fund a daimyo household, sponsor art, or own a successful business while remaining officially lower in status. This tension produced humor, satire, and anxiety in Edo culture. It also shows that social rank and economic power are not always the same thing. A person may be honored in ceremony, yet poor in cash. Another may be treated as low in theory, yet able to influence the world through credit and commerce. Fact 81. Urban culture gave samurai new ways to see themselves. In cities like Edo, Osaka, and Kyoto, samurai lived close to merchants, artisans, actors, writers, and laborers. This proximity created new forms of culture. Shops sold books, clothes, food, prints, and everyday objects. Theaters offered popular entertainment. Restaurants and tea houses created social spaces. Samurai could not simply remain distant figures in armor. They became city residents, customers, officials, neighbors, and sometimes subjects of satire. Urban culture could admire old warrior ideals while also gently mocking samurai, who acted proud, fashionable, broke, or out of touch. The result was a more complicated public image. The samurai was still a symbol of authority, but he was also a human being, navigating crowded streets, social expectations, and the temptations of city life. Let that detail rest for a moment. The samurai world was built not only from dramatic events, but from slow adjustments, ordinary work, and people trying to understand their place in a changing order. Fact 82. Dutch studies introduced new scientific and medical knowledge. Through contact with Dutch traders at Nagasaki, some Japanese scholars gained access to European books and instruments. This field became known as Rangaku, or Dutch learning. It included interest in medicine, anatomy, astronomy, geography, and technology. Translating foreign texts was difficult because language barriers were large and access was controlled. But the effort gradually widened the intellectual world of late Edo Japan. Samurai scholars and officials were among those who studied this material, sometimes because they wanted practical knowledge that could help their domains. Pofund. The story of Dutch studies is another reminder that the Tokugawa era was not simply inward-looking. Even under restrictions, curiosity found paths. A book arriving by ship could travel through translators, scholars and students carrying a view of the world that challenged old assumptions. Fact 83. The arrival of American ships in 1853 exposed the fragility of the Tokugawa order. In 1853, Commodore Matthew Perry arrived with United States naval ships and demanded that Japan open relations. The appearance of steam-powered warships made a strong impression. The Tokugawa government faced a difficult choice: resist, negotiate, delay, or adapt. No option was easy. In the years that followed, treaties, foreign pressure, domestic debate, and political rivalry weakened the shogunate. Samurai disagreed sharply about the path forward. Some wanted to defend old institutions. Some wanted to learn from foreign technology. Some supported stronger imperial rule. The crisis did not come from one ship alone. It revealed tensions that had been growing for years. A political system built for one kind of world suddenly had to face another, faster and more dangerous one. In the stillness of night, history can feel less like a list of dates and more like a landscape. Roofs, rivers, paper screens, fields of rice, and footsteps fading along a corridor. Fact 84. The Bakumatsu period was full of argument, reform, and political uncertainty. The final years of Tokugawa rule are often called the Bakumatsu period. They were marked by intense debate about foreign relations, military reform, the emperor, trade, sovereignty, and the future of Japan. Samurai from different domains became activists, reformers, soldiers, writers, and critics. Some studied Western weapons and shipbuilding. Others argued that foreign influence should be expelled. Others believed the shogunate had lost the ability to protect the country. Old alliances shifted. Violence occurred in some cities, but there were also negotiations, petitions, and plans for a new government. The atmosphere was unsettled because the questions were so large. How could Japan remain independent? Who had the right to rule? What parts of the past should be preserved? And what needed to change? The samurai era was approaching its end, but nobody living through it could see the ending clearly. Fact 85. The Meiji Restoration of 1868 ended the Tokugawa shogunate. In 1868, political power shifted away from the Tokugawa shogunate in what became known as the Meiji Restoration. The emperor was placed at the center of a new national government, and leaders from several powerful domains drove rapid reforms. The transition was not completely peaceful. Civil conflict occurred, and many people faced uncertainty. But the old system of daimyo domains and hereditary samurai service was soon transformed. For centuries, samurai governments had ruled Japan in one form or another. Now the country moved toward a centralized modern state with new institutions, a conscript army, national schools, railways, factories, and changing laws. The restoration was not simply a return to an ancient imperial system. It was a new political project, using the emperor as a powerful symbol, while building modern structures around government. You can picture the quiet spaces around this fact, the document on a desk, the sound of wind around a gate, and the patient rhythm of a life that does not appear in heroic paintings. Fact 86. The old domains were abolished in 1871. After the Meiji Restoration, the new government abolished the former domains in 1871 and replaced them with prefectures. This was a huge change. Daimyo lost their old territorial authority, and administration became more centralized. Samurai who had served domain governments now faced an uncertain future. Some entered the new army, bureaucracy, police, schools, or business. Others struggled as their stipends changed or disappeared. The abolition of domains was more than a map adjustment. It ended a way of life built around local lords, castle towns, hereditary service, and regional political identities. The old samurai order had been held together by personal bonds and domain structures. Once those structures were removed, people had to find new roles in a country changing at remarkable speed. Fact 87. The 1876 sword ban symbolized the end of exclusive samurai privilege. In 1876, the Meiji government issued an edict generally prohibiting the wearing of swords in public, except for certain officials and military personnel. The ban is often remembered as a dramatic symbol of the samurai class losing its old privileges. A sword had long represented status, ancestry, and identity. To be told not to wear it publicly was therefore more than a change of fashion. It announced that the old hereditary order was ending. Of course, swords did not vanish. Families kept them. Crafts continued. Martial traditions survived. But the public image of the samurai walking through town with two swords at his side was no longer the norm. A new kind of citizen, soldier, and official was being created by the modern state. Let the image become gentle now. The banners, roads, and rooms are far away, but the human wish for safety, purpose, and belonging remains easy to recognize. Fact 88. The Satsuma Rebellion was one of the last major samurai uprisings. In 1877, the Satsuma Rebellion became a major armed challenge to the Meiji government. Led by Saigo Takamori, a former samurai leader from Satsuma, the rebellion drew on dissatisfaction and among people affected by rapid change and the loss of samurai status. The new government defeated the rebels using a modern conscript army. The conflict is often remembered as the final dramatic clash between an old samurai world and a new national order. Yet, the reality was complex. Many former samurai had helped build the Meiji state, and many supported the government. The rebellion was not simply old versus new. It was a struggle over power, policy, status, and the pace of change. Still, its defeat marked a symbolic ending to the era when hereditary warriors could challenge the center through their own domain-based forces. What? Fact 89. Four former samurai helped build many institutions of modern Japan. The end of samurai privilege did not mean former samurai disappeared from public life. Many entered the new government, army, police, schools, universities, journalism, industry, and diplomacy. Their education, administrative experience, and family networks adapt. Others did not adapt easily and faced poverty or loss of status. The transition created winners and losers. But it is important to see continuity as well as rupture. The Meiji state was modern in many ways, yet it was built partly by people shaped in the old domain world. Skills learned under the shogunate, discipline, record-keeping, schooling, leadership and regional organization could be redirected into new institutions. History rarely ends one day and begins the next. It carries habits forward, even when uniforms and laws change. Let that detail rest for a moment. The samurai world was built not only from dramatic events, but from slow adjustments, ordinary work, and people trying to understand their place in a changing order. Fact 90. Samurai religion was diverse and changed across the centuries. There was no single samurai religion. Warriors visited Shinto shrines, supported Buddhist temples, consulted diviners, practiced family rites, sponsored memorial services, and followed local traditions. Some became Buddhist monks. Some were deeply engaged with Confucian ethics. Others took part in forms of Christianity during the 16th and early 17th centuries before restrictions tightened. Spiritual life could be personal, political, and practical. A lord might pray for victory, build a temple to honor ancestors, or support a shrine connected to his domain. A soldier might seek protection before a campaign. A family might hold rituals for the dead. This variety matters because it prevents us from reducing the samurai to a single code or belief. Their world was full of different paths for making sense of danger, loss, duty, and hope. Fact 91. Samurai stories were preserved in chronicles, plays, paintings, and family records. Much of what we know about the samurai era comes from many kinds of sources. There are official documents, land records, letters, temple archives, law codes, battle accounts, paintings, armor, castles, and household genealogies. There are also stories, plays, poems, and legends. Each source tells a different kind of truth. A tax record may show who held land. A tale may show what people wanted to remember. A suit of armor may reveal technology and taste. A family document may preserve a local conflict that never entered a national history. Historians compare these traces carefully, because later stories can make the past look neater or more heroic than it was. The samurai era survives not as one perfect record, but as a large, scattered archive, waiting quietly to be read. In the stillness of night, history can feel less like a list of dates and more like a landscape. Roofs, rivers, paper screens, fields of rice, and footsteps fading along a corridor. Fact 92. Ninja and samurai were not simple opposites. Modern stories often treat ninja and samurai as opposite types, secretive shadows versus honorable warriors. The historical reality is less neat. Espionage, scouting, infiltration, disguise, and intelligence gathering existed in Japanese warfare, and people performed such tasks in different ways. Some specialists came from particular regions or served powerful lords. But the popular black-clad ninja image is largely a later theatrical and artistic creation. Samurai armies also needed scouts, informants, messengers, and people who understood enemy territory. War rarely divides cleanly into visible bravery and invisible trickery. Commanders used whatever information they could find. The distinction matters because it lets us see the samurai era as practical. Strategy included watching, listening, bribing, bargaining, and learning, not just charging forward beneath a banner. Fact 93. Logistics often mattered more than individual courage. A famous warrior could inspire people, but an army could not move without food, water, horses, roads, boats, tools, and information. Siege warfare depended on supplies. A castle could hold out only as long as it had grain, wells, defenders, and hope. An attacking army needed to feed itself while cutting off the enemy. Weather could ruin gunpowder, turn odors to mud, or flood a river crossing. Disease could weaken both sides. In this sense, much of samurai warfare was patient and unglamorous. People counted bags of rice, repaired bridges, carried arrows, dug trenches, and watched the sky. The greatest stories may focus on decisive moments, but those moments rested on thousands of small tasks. History is often decided by the work nobody paints. You can picture the quiet spaces around this fact. The document on a desk, the sound of wind around a gate, and the patient rhythm of a life that does not appear in heroic paintings. Fact 94. Japanese castles were designed around landscape as much as walls. A Japanese castle could use hills, marshes, moats, ridges, and roads as part of its defense. Mountain castles took advantage of steep terrain. Flatland castles used moats, embankments, gates, and layered enclosures. Castle builders understood that the land itself could slow an enemy, guide movement, and create surprise. In some places, a castle town grew around a fortified center. In others, the strongest defense was a remote location connected by difficult paths. This relationship between architecture and landscape gives Japanese castles their distinctive feeling. They are not simply buildings placed on land. They are systems shaped with the land. A hill becomes a watchtower. A river becomes a barrier. A turn in the path becomes a tactical decision. The earth itself becomes part of government. Fact 95. The ideal samurai image was shaped heavily by later memory. Much of what people around the world imagine when they hear the word samurai comes from novels, films, theater, prints, museum displays, martial arts, and modern media. These sources can be beautiful and meaningful, but they are not all windows directly onto the past. The peaceful Edo period looked back on earlier warriors with nostalgia. The modern era created new versions of Bushido. 20th century films made the lone swordsman iconic. Games and animation continue to reinterpret the image today. None of this makes the image false. It makes it layered. The samurai is both a historical social group and a symbol that generations have kept reshaping. To understand the era, it helps to hold both ideas at once. There were real people with real duties, and there is also a powerful dream built around them. Let the image become gentle now. The banners, roads, and rooms are far away, but the human wish for safety, purpose, and belonging remains easy to recognize. Fact 96. Samurai culture balanced martial training with artistic cultivation. The contrast between swordsmanship and poetry may feel dramatic, but many samurai ideals valued both. Vitums, bu and bun, expressed the martial and civil sides of cultivation. A capable warrior was not supposed to be merely strong. He might be expected to understand ethics, history, writing, ceremony, and the arts. Of course, real people varied. Some loved books, some preferred weapons, some were competent at neither. But the ideal mattered because it shaped education and status. A lord, who commissioned paintings, sponsored a tea gathering, or wrote poetry, could present himself as more than a fighter. He could claim refinement and legitimate authority. This balance became especially important during peace, when a warrior class needed reasons to exist beyond the battlefield. Fact 97. Cherry blossoms became a powerful symbol, but their meaning was never limited to samurai. Cherry blossoms are often linked with samurai because they bloom brilliantly and fall quickly, making them easy symbols of impermanence. Yet the cultural history of cherry viewing is much broader and older than the samurai image. Court poetry, religious thought, seasonal festivals, and ordinary enjoyment all shaped the meaning of blossoms. In the samurai era, people could see them as raw reminders of life's transience, but also simply as signs of spring. Families gathered beneath them. Poets wrote about them. Artists painted them against rivers, temples, and mountains. It is helpful to let the blossoms remain complex. They do not belong only to warriors or to death. They can also mean return, beauty, public celebration, and the comfort of a season arriving again after winter. Let that detail rest for a moment. The samurai world was built not only from dramatic events, but from slow adjustments, ordinary work, and people trying to understand their place in a changing order. Fact 98. The samurai era changed Japan, but it was not a single, unbroken culture. From the first provincial warriors of the 10th century to the abolition of samurai, privilege in the 19th, nearly 1,000 years passed. And Japan changed enormously during that time. Governments rose and fell. Cities grew. Trade widened. Religions evolved. Weapons changed. Art flourished. The role of a samurai changed from mounted fighter to landholder, from retainer to official, from castle defender to schoolteacher, from domain servant to former stato group in a modern nation. That is why the phrase samurai era is useful but incomplete. It gives us a path through history, yet each century along the path is different. The long story is not one perfect blade. It is a collection of many lives, joined by memory, duty, change, and the passing of time. Fact 99. The legacy of the samurai survives in objects, places, arts, and questions. Today, samurai history remains visible in castles, museums, family documents, theatre, martial arts, literature, and the names of old roads and neighborhoods. Swords and armor are preserved as art. Tea, calligraphy, no, and other traditions continue in changing forms. But the deepest legacy may be the questions the era leaves behind. How should power be used? What does loyalty cost? Can peace transform a military class? How do stories make heroes And what do they leave out? These questions are not only Japanese questions. They belong to anyone trying to understand the past. The samurai world feels distant because of its armor and formal customs. Yet its people worried about work, family, debt, fairness, reputation, and an uncertain future. In that sense, they are not so far away. In the stillness of night, history can feel less like a list of dates and more like a landscape. Roofs, rivers, paper screens, fields of rice, and footsteps fading along a corridor. Fact 100. The end of the samurai era was also the beginning of many new stories. When the old samurai order ended, Japan did not lose its past. It began arguing about it in new ways. Former warriors wrote memoirs. Artists made prints of famous battles. Teachers passed on martial traditions. Politicians used old ideals to support modern goals. Novelists and filmmakers created heroes who could speak to their own times. Each generation selected certain parts of samurai history to remember: courage, discipline, loyalty, artistry, rebellion, or loss. Other parts were less often celebrated: debt, inequality, coercion, war, and the hard labor of ordinary people. A restful history makes room for both. It lets the beautiful objects remain beautiful while also remembering the complicated world that made them. The past becomes calmer when it is allowed to be human rather than perfect. The final fact is perhaps the most important. The samurai were not simply people who fought with swords. Across the centuries, they were farmers, landlords, officials, students, parents, patrons, debtors, travelers, teachers, poets, and servants of larger political systems. Their lives depended on villagers, craftspeople, merchants, monks, women, children, horses, roads, and harvests. They shaped Japanese history, but they were also shaped by it. When we slow the story down, the armor becomes less distant. We can see the person beneath it. Someone reading a letter, worrying about a stipend, walking through rain to an office, listening to a bell, or looking at spring blossoms from a castle town. And perhaps that is the gentlest way to remember the samurai era. You have now wandered through 100 quiet facts about the samurai era. From the first provincial fighters who served powerful households, to the castle towns of the Tokugawa peace, to the final years, when an old status system gave way to a modern state. The story has been long and changing. The samurai were never only one thing. They lived in a world of wars and ledgers, weapons and brushes, duty and doubt, gardens and roads, family hopes, and sudden political change. As the history settles behind you, imagine a castle town at night. The gates are closed. A lantern glows behind a paper screen. Somewhere, rain taps lightly against a roof. Somewhere else, a traveler on a distant road has finally reached an inn. The past is quiet now. Thank you for spending this gentle time with history to fall asleep. Sleep well, and good night.